Where we left off last time, the world was at the end of its formation. Most of these nations will persist to the end of the video, but this is not a luxury gained by some. To some nations, this was a distant dream, no more. This video will be covering the absolute peak of this entire chapter. The most memorable, tragic, brutal, yet this was always present. Because this is La Junta. It has been months of silence. Nations focused on economy rather than territory or war. This was a window of time for peace and stability. Nothing ever happened. It seemed that the world could continue on this peaceful and beautiful path of no war. Yet it seems that this will not last. On the 10th of September, Falkland peacefully negotiated the handing of Marble Island over to Phoenix, acquiring them to unite most of the Phoenixian population. As the world continued on its peaceful path of trade and economy, a sudden voice arose, followed by another. Yet again, Vinoria and Stralin were at the center of global tensions. This time, the debates grew back over numerous historical reasons, such as evidence for the legends of Martin and Dievos. Most of the world turned a blind eye once again, not bothered to respond. However, the debate would soon play out to be important for the following events. Back at Tinian, an island which had been traded off to the Republic of Phoenix, Vinorian communists who were now under the impression that the new republic was far weaker than the already established kingdom months prior were arming themselves for full-scale rebellion. As the world turned its eyes slowly towards the events of the Vinorian-Stralin tensions, the rebels in Tinian openly rebelled and established their own nation, successfully kicking out Phoenix National Guard. They were looking for equipment to arm themselves with, so they turned to Stralin, which was an extremely capitalist nation. They provided strategic aerospace-related equipment, which led to immediate backlash from the world, even Ocean. Eventually, after much fierce debate, Stralin was booted out of Ocean and Vinoria was suddenly invited back. The entire world had their daggers on Stralin's throat, and it was going to be a one-sided war. So, following short, on the 16th, Vinoria and Phoenix declared war on Stralin for the sale of the fighters to Tinian. Falkland joined shortly after. The first day experienced mainly fighting between Vinorian and Stralin air forces. However, on the 17th, the more experienced air forces of Falkland and Phoenix arrived on the scene, which put the casualties at equal numbers. The war was short-lived, however, as on the 18th, while Vinorian and Phoenix fighters fought Stralin again, Falkland snuck into enemy airspace and bombed major enemy air bases, which effectively put them out of the war. Stralin was then forced to sign a humiliating peace treaty, getting forced to give up land to Vinoria and Phoenix and have its army regulated to a certain size. With the threat to the north secured, Ocean now focused back on Tinian. Phoenix orchestrated a combined air, ground, and sea offensive. The day after Stralin collapsed, the operation was carried out, which overwhelmed the defenders, who had suffered a blockade for numerous days in all directions. Eventually, after a fierce fight, Tinian surrendered to Phoenix and its territory was returned. Suddenly, over in Falkland, protests broke out. Many felt that the new direction of Ocean was not benefiting Falkland, so demands were made for the current government to step down. Under severe pressure, elections were held for the replacement government and one Homero H. Bartolo of the Nationalist Party was elected. Immediately after, he cut ties with Ocean and 2 days later, Phoenix left Ocean. For now, Ocean was disbanded. However, just after, Falkland called Phoenix and Stralin for a special operation down south. Puma was taxing its oils export dangerously high and its government was seen as incompetent, so they conducted a full offensive and managed to completely cripple the nation and replace it with the new vassal state of the Mayak Bastian Republic. Stralin, having recently been defeated and humiliated, was in a position where nationalism was on the rise. With the recent collapse of Ocean, the only alliance preventing them from making a move, they began to slowly remilitarize their nation. Vinorian politicians could do nothing except slowly ponder what move to make next, stood silent, while Stralin was already plotting. In the shadows, terrorists were plotting amongst the craziest moves of the chapter. These terrorists were suspected to either be part of the VMA later on, which was a Vinorian paramilitary organization. Their target was clear, and they were not going to be distracted on the way. On the 25th, they made their move, which would shake the world forever. Two aircraft took off as usual for their flights, but soon they were hijacked. They were diverted to their respective targets. One hit San Jose, where it inflicted extreme number of deaths against a residential area, with 315 dead, while the other hit the capital of Haimar and struck a government building. That government building had Phoenix's leader in it, Salve o Presidente. He was killed in the attack, leaving the nation shattered. Following the attack, a wave of anti-Vinorian sentiment swept Alpha, which further fueled nationalism across all nations. This was the beginning of another soar of tensions, and this time it was going to last. On the 27th, Strahlen suddenly made a move towards getting fifth-generation stealth fighters, and Vinoria felt it was blatantly breaking the treaty. So finally, after months of tensions, Vinoria declared the preemptive strike, attempting to catch Strahlen off guard. I swear to fucking God these two idiots won't stop arguing over the stupidest and tiniest shit ever. But despite that, this was still the single largest conflict in La Junta history, in how long it took and how brutal and deadly it was. On the same day the preemptive strike was ordered, Vinoria attempted to gain air superiority over Strahlen. But thanks to the efforts of many brave Strahlen pilots who were able to respond quickly, this never happened, which brought the war to a status quo and gave Strahlen time to prepare for their next move. 2 days later, Vinoria attempted to block off a naval invasion plotted by Strahlen against Kaliningrad Island. While the navies of Vinoria and Strahlen had a long fight around Kaliningrad, Bartland, having recently established their own alliance with Strahlen, proceeded with an extremely high-risk operation where they would infiltrate what they believed to be a VMA operating base. Operation Backdoor was a success and the base was infiltrated. The helicopter flew so low that it was never detected on radar until the last moment, when landing on a Strahlen carrier. Just 1 day later, Kaliningrad was captured by Strahlen Marines with little resistance, whilst Bartland declared war against Vinoria, followed by Zuran and the Mayak Bastion Republic. On the 1st of October, a radar operator working in Volgo, the capital of Strahlen, detected a nuclear threat on his radar. He immediately dispatched the information to his superiors, and they immediately shot off air defenses at what they believed to be a missile. To this day, it is unknown what exactly the object was. The coalition claimed it was a nuclear missile, while Vinoria simply claimed it was a non-nuclear missile. Either way, this fueled total hatred against Vinoria, and Phoenix declared war. On the 3rd of October, Bartland coordinated an airstrike using cruise missiles against many key Vinorian bases, managing to effectively put out and cripple the entire Vinorian Air Force in a single move, clearing the path for the final ground offensive. The final airborne Vinorian aircraft were picked off by the coalition's missiles. During the final wiping out of the Vinorian Air Force, a Bartland pilot managed to kill a Vinorian VN-39 using a Jazu missile, proving his nation's capability and skill in air missions. Finally, after careful planning, a much-anticipated beach landing occurred on the 5th, where Strahlen troops heroically stormed the beaches of northern Vinoria and attempted to capture the first hill, which would be key for the rest of the operation. After high deaths from defenders and some from the attackers, the hill eventually fell and camp was established on the slope facing the beach. This was the beginning of the end for the Kingdom of Vinoria. As the war reached its heights, an election was held within Phoenix, and a chain of events led to the fascist party of Phoenix being elected. Its leader, Sloperdan, was more commonly known as the Krier. He won this election in a total landslide, managing to affirm his power in a single move. But this does not give our beating bag a rest. As quickly as the war had started, Strahlen forces won a number of engagements on the hills north of the capital, Vau, establishing a spearhead and slowly advancing towards the objective. When the final hill fell, much of the Vinorian armed forces had been defeated too. So, following the news, the king withdrew the last of the armed forces into the capital to begin fortifying for war. But this period of time did not last long. Finally, on the 14th, Strahlen entered the capital, and after a short battle over 24 hours, the nation capitulated. The north was annexed into Strahlen, while the south fell to the new vassal state of Zuidland. This was the downfall of the Vinorian kingdom. Now, I must admit something while I was almost 11 minutes into editing this video. It seems that there was conflict in another continent, ongoing at the same time as the one just mentioned. Thus, I must give some background to Bravo. You see, in Bravo there was only one nation at the time, despite the numerous ethnicities present around this territory. The nation was Alberbuti, and it had several important issues. First of all, many of the ethnicities around Alberbuti were hostile against them, as some years prior they had taken territory away from each of the groups. However, the first of these ethnicities to unite were the Highlanders, who resided in extremely mountainous terrain to the west. They had felt that the occupied territories were unjust and that if action was not taken, that more territory will fall. So, on the 21st of September, several groups united in these territories and formed the First Highlander Republic, immediately vowing war against Alberbuti for the occupied territories of Posh, which was their historical capital. Initially, the Highlanders managed to catch Alberbuti off guard and even secured absolute air superiority over all of Bravo, making slight gains on the ground. However, when Alberbuti called in its allies from Alpha, Highlanders began to struggle. Eventually, White Peace was signed and the other parts of Bravo were split by other major powers of Alpha, but it wasn't long before the locals had gotten inspiration and declared their own nations, with Lemonea taking the former Bartland colony and Montjuic being established in the former territories of Phoenix's colony. What now began was a golden age for the world. Many nations were at peace and had great relations with each other, generating minimal problems. But as usual, windows of peace never last. 3 weeks after the conflict in Bravo and Alpha, the Mayak Bastion Republic demanded the strategic military base of Area 51, attempting to strengthen its hold over the desert world and keeping Zoran simply as an ally. The Krer, being eager for war to bring a form of glory to his empire, would declare war on Locust just 1 day later. The fighting would last for some days, however. Another event would disrupt this way later on, an event that would be too important to miss. Give it 8 days. The fighting was brief. To summarize it, neither side made a significant gain over the enemy for some time, thus it remained somewhat present but not too important. On the 21st, the Mayak Bastion Republic experienced the worst hurricane in its history. Many surrounding nations, such as Straland, offered heavy assistance, but despite the aid, there was still a significant loss. A humanitarian aid, Mi-8 helicopter was caught by sudden winds and was thrown straight into the ocean, proving a truly sad loss. The hurricane eventually did hit mainland Mayak Bastion Republic, but did not pose significant damage for the most part, only managing to make a trampoline fly in a coastal area, amongst some injuries due to debris. Even back at Bravo, peace was short-lived again. Montjuic, Highlanders, and Lemonea had done preparations for a prolonged war against Alberbuti, planning to split its lands together as a coalition. On the 22nd, they had decided to make their move. But an unexpected event occurred. Just 8 minutes after the coalition had begun their invasion, Alberbuti's government had suddenly collapsed, leaving the territory to be an absolute free-for-all, allowing the coalition to easily partition the territory between themselves. On the 25th, Vinorians, hoping to secure their last chance of independence, rebelled in what was now Zitland. Despite overwhelming numbers, their rebellion failed with absolutely catastrophic losses, losing roughly 9 times of what Zitland had. This was the final nail for Vinoria, and they will never resurface. As it turns out, the Kreer wanted to nuke Locust, raising immediate concern over their actions and plans. Even their closest allies, Bardlin and Straland, found this to be immediately alarming, so they reached out to Locust to plan Operation Mirage, which would turn out to be an absolute tactical masterpiece. While a lone Phoenix bomber attempted to reach Locust's capital, it was suddenly shot down and hell broke loose, with Bartland and Straland beginning their strikes deep into enemy territory. Almost every single airbase was obliterated and bombed. One base remained operational, midway, and the coalition knew a single job must be done. The Megabart was deployed. Following the invasion, many Kreer loyalists fled to Montjuic, their former colony state, forming their own faction within the government and began to influence the local politics. In turn, Highlanders saw this as an opportunity to establish a firm alliance with a powerful figurehead. Practically a month flew by, with the only difference being a temporary change of leadership in Bartland to the president weeks prior. But they changed back to Homro anyways. Suddenly, a man had descended from heaven to return to Alpha once more. It was none other than the beloved Salve o Presidente, now challenging the Krier to a boxing match. This was refused because the Krier was a fucking wuss, which allowed Salve o Presidente to be the leader of the Phoenix Restoration movement. Finally, after a decent struggle, he managed to become the leader of a new Phoenix nation. Ironically, an election was held the day after in Montjuic, which would change Bravo forever. During the election, a new leader was placed which promised to unite Bravo, proving to be an instant stress to the Highlanders. Suddenly, Lemonnier gave in to demands over their mainland Bravo territory. However, at the same moment, southern Montjuic broke off as the Krier attempted to make his own nation in Bravo. Following short, war was declared on the Highlanders, and so began the single bloodiest week of Bravo history, thankfully to be the last war in Bravo. Halfway through the tension, Ocean was reformed by Phoenix, Bartland and Strahlen once again, returning the old hegemon of the world. Montjuic, with close ties to the new Republic of Phoenix, managed to call Ocean on their side as they believed Highlander to be an absolute threat in the way to their goal of unifying Bravo. Because of this, it is not surprising to learn that Highlanders capitulated quite quick into the war, just 6 days after the declaration, following an absolute obliteration of their air and ground force. On the 11th, the Krier's personal army was obliterated by airstrikes, granting Montjuic to finally unite the lands under one flag. Meanwhile, in yet another new continent, Olenia was suffering a boiling point in its internal tensions so much that a three-front civil war broke out between fascists, communists, and the central government. After a week-long fight, the communists established their own nation here, and they set up a satellite state to their south, beginning a short Red Scare. This entire nation had great relations with Strahlen and Bartland due to an industrial alliance. During the conflict, the fascist rebels shot down an RSS fighter, which caused the international stage to speak against them from now on, which boosted the communist morale during the conflict. Angelstan, the neighbor to the north, temporarily allowed the communists into the air. The same day the Olenian Socialist Republic was formed, the Krier's mansion, high up in the mountains of Bravo, was located, and a short raid occurred which resulted in his death, forever killing the worst dictator the world had seen to this point. And just 1 day after the Krier's death, Bartland officially declared war on Locust, managing to gain absolute air superiority, but ceased the war after a week, due to an attempt to negotiate with Locust politicians. What followed was the final window of peace in La Junta history, lasting a complete 2 months, which let many nations have time to develop their militaries and industries for what they believed was going to be the final month of Chapter 2. And this month was no exception to the brutality that was usual with La Junta. The 2 months of silence was suddenly disrupted by activity in Olenia. While on a joint recon operation, Bartland discovered a suspicious warehouse not far from an industrial sector, promptly warning Olenian authorities, which triggered a response. The warehouse was identified to have been a safe house for pro-democracy rebels. Olenia authorized Bartland to airstrike the building, while their ground troops soon secured the area. But as it turns out, this was a horrible mistake. Just the next day, democratic rebels managed to rebel, but they couped the government so quick and efficiently that the Socialist Republic collapsed immediately after and joined Phoenix in a pan-continental union of similar cultures. But its satellite state was different. What occurred there was a complete massacre and disregard for any human rights, even attacking ocean peacekeepers. This nation was not even settled for an entire month before it eventually managed to get its fascist government replaced. The next day, Bartland, getting exhausted after practically 2 months straight of negotiations, would commit a bombing run on all of Locust that would end up so effective that they surrendered almost immediately, establishing Romania in locust former position. But it seemed that trouble was brewing rapidly in the desert territories. Bartlan and Phoenix took note of one particular terrorist organization, Al-Skibidi. They even orchestrated a full setup which eventually led to the terrorists being tricked into transporting all their might on a single ship. Their plan was to attack the capital from within, but they got trolled. Despite the insanely successful wiping out of an entire terrorist organization in one move, this still did not prevent trouble from brewing in Zuran, where extremism reaches its limits. An attempted coup occurred, which then caused other factions to immediately start their own rebellions, starting a civil war within the nation. Luckily, this only lasted 3 days due to a truce organized because of Ramadan. But on the 6th, turmoil suddenly occurred within Phoenix when extreme right-wing members of parliament plotted an assassination against Salvio Presidente's son, which caused the nationalists to storm the parliament. What followed was complete chaos, with right-wing insurgents rebelling just east of Haimar, while Tinian declared independence. Luckily, this situation was short-lived and both rebellions were put down in a joint effort by the government and parliament. But there was a loss. Salvio Presidente Jr. was killed. What followed was the nation's rebranding into a monarchy due to a severe lack of politicians, as many were killed in the 2-day conflict. A new nation arose on the 8th day. The Falkland Socialist Republic would overthrow a weakened and split government that was managed by the United Nations. You may ask what is worth noting about this. Well, their leader Ferentzov was a severe schizophrenic. He believed that Lenin would eventually arrive and that he must maintain a regent-like state over the continent in order to prepare for his arrival. He had an absolute reign of terror over his nation, executing many politicians and generals in the process. He will be mentioned again soon. On the 12th, the Mayak Bastion Republic would declare independence from Bartland, which was immediately looked down upon by most nations apart from the Falkland Socialists. Just 4 days after gaining its independence, the Mayak Bastion Republic managed to successfully launch an invasion against Zuru, crippling their already split situation completely. The territory was integrated into the Mayak Bastion, but an unexpected event occurred. Bartlan called all Barts to unite. Mayak Bastion Republic accepted the offer, and the same day when Zurhuan fell, the United Bart State Republic was formed, encompassing the majority of Alpha now. The 3 lions of Alpha stood strong in their power. But in Falklands, Ferentzov consulted with his advisors for one last time. It seems that there was no mention of Lenin in the government's civilian database. Ferentzov, instead of crashing out as usual, stood silent during the meeting. He soon announced to his advisors that the superpowers of Alpha must be hiding critical information on his whereabouts. He ordered his full army to prepare for war, and in the late hours of the same day, he paradropped his forces into Pearl Harbor Island. He attempted an invasion outwards from the island before eventually the island was destroyed. Ocean managed to organize quickly and led a strike back against the Falklands using carriers. Another wave of missile strikes followed and their air defense capability was shattered. The day following, Ocean ordered a naval invasion, managing to take over Stanley. In his bunker, Ferentzov, knowing that the situation was lost, would take his own life, with Lenin in mind. As the last order to cripple the Falklands, the coalition hunted down an extremely powerful loyalist politician and killed him in a short raid, forever destroying the Socialist Republic's spirit in a matter of 2 days. And that was the final event of La Junta's greatest chapter.